Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. Today's guest is Danielle Hamilton. She is an FNTP, and we'll talk about what that means. And she helps clients learn to improve their blood sugar. We are not diabetic, yet we have both learned a lot from balancing our blood sugar. So I'm really, really excited for this podcast episode. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the title of your podcast so much. I resonate with it so much. I'm like, I feel like a hippie, but I love makeup and I need to have grass-fed food, you know?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be Botox or things like that. I just feel like there's such a middle ground where, we get to choose what works best for us. And a lot of people like to get dressed up and also appreciate nature and the simplicity and getting back to the basics. So fellow high maintenance hippie, tell the audience, what is an FNTP? What is that certification and what does that allow you to do?
Yes. So I am a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. So the functional word means that I learned about this functional exam, basically, where we can use the body, different sort of muscle testing or different functional tests where we use different reflex points in the body to identify imbalances or areas of need in the body. We are holistic practitioners and focus on the root causes and consequences of those root causes being out of balance. So the functional foundational approach that we learn has to do with these 6 foundations. So a nutrient-dense whole foods diet, digestion, mineral balance, fatty acid balance, blood sugar, and hydration. And so those are the nutritional foundations we learn about. And then everything else. So when I had issues like PCOS and hormones or cardiovascular, immune stuff, those are all consequences of the foundations being deficient or out of balance. And so a lot of healing can be done just by working on those foundations. So I was always trying to work on things backwards. And as an FNTP, we don't diagnose or treat any diseases. So I'm not giving any, maybe we'll talk about some blood sugar numbers and things like that, but I don't diagnose anybody. So what I do is help recognize that the body needs minerals, the body needs to have stable blood sugar. Like there's all these things that our body needs. And I help you with those foundations, not treating any diseases. But that's what my certificate allows me to do.
Beautifully said. And I would love to know the timeline as far as you learned about blood sugar issues being a huge root cause of a lot of the things you were experiencing, PCOS, hormonal issues. Did you dive into blood sugar because of that program? Did you do that program because of what you had experienced? What was that order like?
Yeah, so I did the program after I discovered these issues. So my story about discovering them, it was a long story. It was a long journey to figure this stuff out. So I started out as just like any other kid, I loved processed breakfast foods and, toaster strudels and like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Like I was really into these sugary foods and that was what I was fed. But of course, my mom in the 90s was trying to keep me healthy. So it was always low fat and I had to have Special K. Like I honestly wasn't really allowed to have the Cinnamon Toast Crunch because that was too sugary, but I had, Special K and low fat granola bars. And I always, not surprisingly, had a lot of colds and strep throat and ear infections and tons of antibiotics. By the time I got to high school, I got strep throat 6 times my senior year and needed to get my tonsils out. Then the next year, I developed really bad seasonal allergies. And only after telling this story on many podcasts, I realized, it was because I got my tonsils out. That is part of our immune system. It tags like intruders, it's like, hey, this is coming down the pipe. And so I got rid of this piece of my immune system and it kind of went haywire. I'm sure the drinking and poor eating, didn't help my case at all. So I had these allergies, I got asthma, I was on multiple inhalers, I was on multiple allergy meds, Singulair, Zyrtec, all the things. And then I moved to Miami, Florida for grad school, where the season for allergies was all year round. And I was even allergic to mold. I was allergic to stuff outside and inside. I was allergic to palm trees. It's like, is that seriously possible? Well, it was possible. And I was allergic to them. So I was getting allergy shots to help reduce my sensitivity to all these allergens. I was allergic to so many things. I ended up getting 3 shots. And then a year later, I had to get 2 more because I was allergic to more stuff. I was working as a speech therapist at the time at a nursing center and asked if a nurse at where I worked could give me the shots because I was going broke from copays, having to go in every couple days to get these shots. So a nurse taught me how to give myself the allergy shots. So I was giving myself 5 allergy shots every other day in the stomach. It was my early 20s. I had chronic sinus infections. I was so tired from the sinus infections that I would just like drop a pen at work and start bursting out crying. It was a mess. And I also had a lot of gynecological issues. I had my gyno on speed dial. I mean, I was falling apart. And I would ask at the doctor, why is this happening to me? Because I was always trying to eat healthy. I would have the brown rice and the whole wheat bread and I wasn't getting fast food. I was, trying to cook from home. And it felt like I was trying to do everything right, but really didn't have anything to show for it. So the other thing that was happening at that time was that I was, like I said, working as a speech therapist in the nursing home, and I would have to do chart reviews and see all the diagnoses and all the medications that my patients were on. Mm-hmm. And I just saw, okay, these people are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I'm in my 20s, and I'm already on a huge list of medications. And I just saw this like little dotted line from, where I was then to right to the nursing home. And it scared the heck out of me because I did not want to end up there. I do not want to end up there. So by the grace of the universe, I got this book in my hand called The Paleo Diet Solution by Rob Wolf. And it talked about the paleo diet, which is basically cutting out processed foods and embracing whole, real foods, a concept that I had never heard of at the time. This was 2012. And I quickly embraced that diet and started eating this way. And like magic, every single issue that I had just melted away. No more allergies, no more asthma, no more sinus infections, no more tendonitis, chronic tendonitis in my ankle. It was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I wanted to shout it from the rooftops. I wanted to tell everybody I knew, like, food can heal you. This is amazing. And so I was, flying high on my little paleo train and I was doing great. And then I moved to New York City following an ex, and it was a stressful year to say the least. And so all of a sudden I started to develop a lot of hormonal symptoms. So now I'm in my mid 20s and I was like, is this just what happens in your mid 20s? Like, this is kind of weird. So I was really tired all the time, would sleep until like 11 a.m. when typically I was a very early riser. I had always had PMS, but now this was like intense PMS. And I used to get PMDD. I would break up with whoever I was dating like the week before my cycle. I had always had acne, but my acne was now starting to be all over my cheeks, all over my forehead, cystic acne. It wasn't just like, oh, a couple of pimples before my cycle. It was really, really bad. And I started gaining so much weight. And I was like, wait, like this diet just healed me. Like, what is happening? So I couldn't figure it out. And so, of course, I went to Google and I actually also stopped getting my period. So for 6 months, I stopped getting a period. And I was like, okay, something's happening. And I figured out on Google, I probably have polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS. And so I was looking really hard to try to figure out what causes PCOS, like what can I do for it? And the only thing out there at the time was really don't have gluten, don't have dairy, don't have refined sugar. It's like, check. I'm doing paleo. I'm not doing any of those things. So I guess I just tried to paleo harder. And of course, because nothing changed. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't making any headway. I was eating healthy foods. I knew the answer wasn't go back to doing what I was doing before because that made me sick too. So I was really stuck and was convinced by my mom, maybe just go to a doctor, get some medications, alleviate some of your symptoms as you still continue to, hunt for the root cause. So I was, listening to all these podcasts, reading every blog post, still no answers. So I reluctantly went to the doctor and I said, listen, I'm working out, I'm eating healthy, and I think I have PCOS. And he said, well, you do have PCOS. You have to lose weight. You have to take the pill, and there's no cure. Like,
oh, okay.
Well, okay. Okay. So needless to say, I was more motivated than ever to figure this out on my own. So he forced me to take a prescription for the pill out of the office. I ripped it up when I got in my car and I was like, I'm not doing that. I did take metformin and spironolactone for a period of time, which did help my symptoms. And if I had known any better, I would have known that metformin is a drug for insulin resistance and diabetes. But I didn't know that. So I wasn't thinking, oh, this diabetes drug helped me. Maybe I should look into blood sugar. I didn't know. So I just went on my merry way and was still trying to figure this out. And it wasn't until years later in 2018 that I heard a podcast where someone said PCOS is the diabetes of the ovaries. And I almost drove my car off the road because I was so shocked. And I was like, okay, diabetes. What do we know about diabetes? I was like, well, something about blood sugar and something about amputations. That's all I knew because and I knew that my patients with diabetes got the pink sugar packet. That's all I knew about diabetes. So if I knew that little, and I was in this health world, like consuming content nonstop, I knew so much about holistic health, yet I knew nothing about diabetes. I was like, okay, I need to hit the books. And I actually went back to these books, actually this one right behind me, Practical Paleo. I had skipped over all the chapters of blood sugar. I'm like, why did I do that? Well, blood sugar was boring. It was complicated. And I wasn't diabetic, so I didn't think I had to pay attention to it. And meanwhile, it was seriously sabotaging every single aspect of my health. And I was like, well, I'm not diabetic, so I don't have to care. And I couldn't have been more wrong. And what I didn't know about my blood sugar was really hurting me. So as I looked back and I learned about blood sugar, I started to realize, oh my goodness, all these symptoms that I have of blood sugar issues, I thought they were personality traits and they're not.
Yeah.
So the idea that I'm a snacker. I'm a foodie. Like I always need to be eating. Like, no, I was a snacker because my blood sugar was dropping. I used to say, I don't have a sweet tooth. All my teeth are sweet. Like that was my little saying for myself. It's like, no, that's a sign of blood sugar issues. I was the hangry friend, and like being hangry, again, not a personality trait at all. So if you're hangry, I don't mean to call you out in a bad way. I just want to tell you like, hey, that's actually fixable. And that's a sign that there's something going on. I used to say I'm a breakfast person. And that's why I like to eat breakfast right away, because I would wake up and I'd be shaky and I would hate going to fasting blood work. I'm like, oh, I hate needles. I hate fasting blood work. I'm a breakfast person. I almost passed out at an appointment where I had to get fasting blood work, almost passed out right in the street in Miami Beach. And my blood sugar was 60. And not one doctor said anything to me. I went to several different specialists, got fasting blood work 3 times that year that I had PCOS, trying to get to the root of it. My blood sugar was 60, 60, and 63 at all of these appointments. And not one doctor said anything to me. My head felt like a balloon. I was so close to passing out. I was super shaky, super anxious. I didn't say that to them, but they didn't ask. Like, I didn't know that wasn't normal. I was just like, well, I'm not eating. So I didn't know what it was, but I just hated feeling hungry. So that hatred of feeling hungry, I would always be that person who ate before I left the house. I was always thinking about where I was getting my next meal. I always had food with me. It was a granola bar, or it was almonds, or it was a Lara bar. When I went paleo, I had food in my car. I couldn't leave the house without food. And I just thought I was a foodie. I'm like, oh, I like to eat, and I felt a little shamed about that. And then there was some other things, like I used to binge eat, and I never told anybody that. That was like this dirty secret. And once I stabilized my blood sugar, that got better. And so it's like, oh, okay, like starting to understand this in a different way. So all this time, I had all these blood sugar issues, and they were driving. What was at the root of that was also high insulin levels. And we can definitely go into that if you want. And insulin drives up testosterone in women, which can drive PCOS. And that's that connection for so many people. And then this high insulin state is also a very inflammatory state. And high inflammation and high androgens for many women drives that PCOS and leads to infertility and all those symptoms I was talking about earlier. And you'll see a lot of posts on Instagram that say, like, with PCOS, it's really common to have insulin resistance or blood sugar issues. And I think that's reverse. I think that is what's driving the blood sugar issues. And so at the beginning, when I talked about all those symptoms and the foundations and the root causes, the blood sugar is a foundation, but hormone balance is not. And so I was trying to fix my hormones and I wasn't making a dent in them until I started fixing my blood sugar and all my hormones regulated. So if you have hormone issues, if you relate to that, I will guarantee you have blood sugar issues too. 88% of the population has metabolic issues, which means issues with blood sugar and insulin. So, and I honestly think they're underestimating that number, and those figures are several years old by now. So I think that there's probably this tiny percentage, I would say probably less than 10% of the population is overall metabolically healthy. And so if you're listening to this, you probably fall under that umbrella, unless you're really, really working on this. Because one of the things that stands out to me is that I was eating really healthy foods. Mm-hmm. So on paper, I mean, nutrient dense, organic, grass fed, like I was doing all the things right. I wasn't doing refined sugar. I was doing coconut sugar. I wasn't doing like rice. I was doing like a organic sweet potato. So it's like all these things that I thought I was doing right. I just didn't pay attention to carbs. And it was a big, big problem for me. So that's my story.
Amazing. And I'm so grateful that you went through that, not because I wish harm or suffering on you, but my health crisis in 2018 shattered everything. I'm a nurse and I realized that there's very limited information as far as why this is happening. There were, in my case, 9 medications that I could take to alleviate the symptoms, and they didn't even alleviate the symptoms. So you mentioned something, which is you were taking some meds and your mom was like, maybe that would be helpful while you're addressing the root cause. And that's what I would love to see, because I'm not anti-med. I think, let's say your blood pressure is 180 over 100 every single day. Take the blood pressure medicine, but let's figure out why it's so high, because I don't think that is necessarily healthy. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to be as independent and physically, financially, and just in our quality of life. So that why is what we're missing.
Yeah. And guess what the number one cause of high blood pressure is? Insulin resistance.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people would say, well, I thought it was sodium.
Yeah.
So what would you say?
No, it's the wrong white powder, sugar.
Yeah.
High insulin drives hypertension. And so that is one of the most common signs. Like if you have high blood pressure, you fall under that 88% umbrella of having suboptimal metabolic health.
Metabolic health is so important because a lot of people think, okay, there's going to be an illness. There will be many more that come out, or pandemics. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on YouTube, but there will be something else. And if we can become as metabolically healthy as possible, that's how we will thrive. That is my approach. It sounds like it's your approach as well. A lot of people, myself included, I didn't think I had blood sugar issues. My fasting blood sugar was always in the mid 70s, which I was told was great. And my A1C was also optimal. I mean, in your case, your fasting blood sugar was low. Mm-hmm. And what about fasting insulin? Is that something that was ever tested for you by one of your doctors?
No, and I wish it was. So fasting insulin, you're bringing up some great points. And I want to touch on a couple of things that you said. So starting with fasting insulin, our doctors are not going to test for this unless they suspect that we have some like insulin producing tumor. The ranges that your doctor will use for fasting insulin is 2 to 20. The ranges I use in my practice are 2 to 5. So if you're above 5, you will very likely already be showing early signs of insulin resistance. So we really need to keep that fasting insulin very tightly controlled. Your doctor is not going to test for this. And even if you ask for it, most doctors won't test it because they don't know what to do with this information. They don't know how to interpret it. And there's no drug that they can give you to help your fasting insulin. It's something that is just very much out of their realm, of the way that people traditionally practice Western medicine. So I really recommend people get this tested. It's something that we can keep track of over time and that we want to really get in that good range. And that will be really, really helpful for our health. You talked about the fasting numbers, your fasting number being in the mid 70s, which is great. So the doctors, I see them using ranges that where they're looking for the presence of disease. They're looking for prediabetes. They're looking for diabetes.
Yeah.
They're not looking for anything else. On the rare occasion, I mean, if the blood sugar's coming out like 50 or 40, yeah, they'll probably tag you as hypoglycemic. But even 60, they didn't say anything to me where I was feeling hypoglycemic. And you may have been feeling hypoglycemic in the 70s as well. So these fasting blood glucose numbers, what doctors are missing, if you are feeling hypoglycemic, which I should specify, feeling hypoglycemic feels like dizzy, shaky, lightheaded, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, weakness, anxiety, heart palpitations, nausea, headaches, tired, cravings, intense hunger. Those are all symptoms, and there's more, of hypoglycemia. So if you're feeling that at any blood sugar number, you need to work on your metabolic health, right? We need to work on blood sugar and insulin. So you could have this perfect number, yet you feel like your head's a balloon, that it's not healthy for you. You're not in a healthy spot, right? So that's first and foremost. They're not taking into account these symptoms. Secondly, the ranges that they're looking for are for disease. So they're not specific enough for where they're looking for optimal. So optimal for me is about 70 to 85. If you are outside the country, just divide all these numbers by 18 to get the millimoles. So I apologize for anyone who's international, but really easy conversion. Just get your calculator out. So 70 to 85 would be optimal if you're feeling good at those numbers, right? So if you're at 72 and you're feeling like you're going to pass out, not good. The range that they also miss would be that 86 to 99 range. Your doctor, if you're in that range, will probably say, oh, it's great. No problem. 98, perfect. You're under 100. Everything is fine. They don't think that there's a problem there, but I do. Because why? Because our insulin is actually very likely creeping up for decades before we even see a change in these blood sugar numbers. The insulin's job is to take sugar out of the blood and put it into the cells of the body to use for energy or to store for later. So that's how insulin lowers blood sugar, because it's moving it from the blood into the body, right? Into the muscle cells, into the brain cells, liver cells, etc. Insulin, when we get a lot of it, what raises our insulin? Carbohydrates, especially refined ones, and snacking. Really, so if we're eating all the time, our blood sugar is spiking and then it's going down, but that insulin takes longer to come down than the blood sugar does. But then we eat again because we have a mid-morning snack, and then we have a coffee, and then we have lunch. And then, so it's all the time. Stress raises our insulin, infections, toxins. So all of these things can be driving up our insulin levels. Poor sleep is a huge driver of this, and poor circadian rhythms. So artificial lights at night, screens, it's driving up our cortisol, which is going to drive up our blood sugar. It's driving up insulin. So all these hormones are very, very connected. Being inside all the time, not getting sunlight, really important. Seems out there, but I think we're all hippies on this podcast. So I think we can embrace that. So all these factors are driving up our insulin, and our bodies are so resilient and so smart and so adaptable that what starts to happen is we get a high level of insulin, and now the insulin's knocking on the cell and being like, hey, I have some glucose for you. But it's like, you were just here. I don't want to hear you. I don't want this anymore. So now we need 2 insulins to be knocking on the door. It's like, hey, we have some glucose for you. And then, the sugar will get into the cell. Then maybe we need 3 or 4 insulin. Now we need 4 or 5 times the insulin to get the sugar out of the blood. So that's how insulin resistance starts happening. And all the while, we just have these building up levels of insulin in our blood, which is a big problem because it's driving other hormonal issues. Like I said, it's an inflammatory state. So it's really not a good thing. It is at the root of basically every single chronic disease. Heart disease, Alzheimer's is being called type 3 diabetes, fatty liver disease, infertility, PCOS, you name it. autoimmunity. Like our immune system is so impacted by our blood sugar. It's something that I almost forget about because I don't talk about the immune system on Instagram because, you want to get censored. So, but it's super, super important. So these insulin levels are building up over time. And for years, they can build up before we see a change in our blood sugar. So now our blood sugar fasting is about like 86 to 99. I wonder what our insulin levels are, right? So we have to think potentially the insulin levels are going to be 2 times as high as they should be. Maybe they're around 8 or 10. And so we start to see the insulin having trouble getting the sugar where it needs to go. So it's a long story for that, but I hope it kind of makes sense of like what's going on at the root of it. And then once your blood sugar gets over 100, this is where I default to the doctor's ranges. And again, I'm not diagnosing you, and you need more than just the fasting number for a diagnosis, but educational only. 100 to 125, the doctors will consider pre-diabetic, and there's millions of people who are pre-diabetic, and about 8 out of 10 of them do not know that they have this. And then 126 and above would be considered diabetic. And that's what the doctors are kind of looking for, because that's when they can intervene. They can give you metformin when your blood sugar is 126. They can't do anything when your blood sugar is 90. They can't do anything. They have no tools to give you. So I'm not trying to be like a conspiracy theorist, but I'm just saying this is what it is. This is what I see in my practice. And people are getting missed, and they're getting honestly gaslit, because it's like, you're coming in, I don't feel well, I have anxiety, I feel lightheaded, I'm craving all the time, I have PCOS, and it's like, well, your blood sugar is fine. It's like, well, fine is, I don't want to feel fine, we want to feel really good. We want to feel great. And the A1C is another really great metric that doctors use, but there's gaps in this, because what is the A1C? It is an average of our blood sugar over the last 3 months. Mm-hmm. And what do we know about averages? If we have blood sugar spikes that are spiking high and dropping low, our average is going to be perfect.
Exactly.
So again, we can really be missed with this number. So what the fasting glucose number and the A1C can do is it can rule in prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It cannot rule out insulin resistance, hypoglycemia, or reactive hypoglycemia. It can't, or early blood sugar dysregulation. It cannot rule those things out. So it can just say, okay, I'm not pre-diabetic or diabetic. That's what it can tell us. Or yes, I am. Yes, I have this. So that's where it's like, okay, well, how do we figure out what those other things are then, right? Like that's the sort of question we're left with. And for this is where we want to invest in continuous glucose monitors. The absolute best tool I have used, the best biohacking thing. It is like a window into your soul. It is a window into everything that's happening, how your body is responding to all different things. We can see in real time how our blood sugar is responding to meals, to snacks, to stress, to workouts, to heat or cold exposure, to arguments, to deep breathing sessions. Overnight, we can see what's happening. And we can also see the impact of hormones. And all of these things that I mentioned are things that impact our blood sugar. A lot of my clients are like, my blood sugar just got so much worse. Like it's dropping all the time. Like what happened? I'm like, is it the week before your cycle? And they're like, it is. So what happens is our estrogen goes down that week and we become more insulin resistant. So that's where we often have our worst blood sugar week, is that week before the cycle. So it's something to keep in mind, but this is something we can see on CGMs. And then with the knowledge, we can start playing with how to adjust it. So let's say there's a favorite food that I eat. There's a restaurant here in Austin called Picnic, and it's like a paleo restaurant. And they have this amazing gluten-free bread. I have no idea what it's made out of. And it spiked the heck out of my blood sugar like crazy. And I'm like, oh man, it's so good. Like I thought I had this like wonderful thing that I can eat. Like, cool, I get to eat bread. No, it was an abomination to my blood sugar. I felt terrible after it. And that's another thing it allows you to do, is to start to connect your symptoms. Could it be my blood sugar, right? So now when I go to this restaurant, I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to order the bread, or maybe sometimes I want to choose to order it. Like, you know what? It's worth the blood sugar spike. But that knowledge is power, because now we can decide, like, do I want to feel this way? I know what it's going to do to my blood sugar, or do I not want to? So, like, for example, ice cream is my favorite food. And sometimes I want to have ice cream. So there's things I can do to help mitigate that blood sugar spike so it doesn't affect me so much. And so I can still have that as part of my life, because I'm not working on healing my blood sugar. I wouldn't recommend that during a healing phase. But once we've gotten past that and we can have a little bit more flexibility, this is where these tools come in as well, to see, like, okay, how can I do the least amount of harm while still, having a little YOLO moment, right? But not like totally going overboard. We can strike a nice balance that feels good with our life and not feeling too restrictive. And it's going to be different for everybody. So I'll let you jump in, because I've been monologuing for a little while.
Yeah. I mean, that's so well said. So one thing I want to mention, I actually have a CG on myself right now. Let's see. You can kind of see the outline, but a lot of people say that I'm living in fear, that I hate food. I'm like, no, this is what my experience was. I made a shift probably 2010 to as many organic foods as I could, maybe even before that. And anxiety and irritability were the things that I dealt with the most. So what do you get for that? An SSRI, Klonopin, something like that. I'm not saying that it didn't alleviate the symptoms, but it didn't explain why. My brain says, oh, it must just be because you're broken or crazy. And I've learned that there are many things that influence how we feel. So what was really cool, I had my CGM. I only had it for 2 weeks in the very first time. And I realized I was all over the place. So I would drop really low. I would spike high. My goal, and we'll talk a little bit more about goals for CGMs, I try to keep mine within a 30-point window. 50 is also okay, but that's really where I feel my best. So let's say I wake up and it's 80. I don't want it to get above 110. I was eating something called a macro bar. You mentioned Lara bars. And the macro
bars are rough on your blood sugar.
I was so shocked because I had had 2 pints of ice cream a couple nights before. It didn't do to me what the macro bar did. And I was like, wait a minute, how is that possible? But this has clean ingredients. And I actually remember seeing you at Paleo FX maybe like a year ago, and there was a food and I was like, oh, this looks so cool. It has clean ingredients. And literally the first thing you said was, no, it's not going to be good for blood sugar. And I was like, interesting. And I've really learned a lot since then, but I mean, you really know your stuff. So I was like, all right, well, maybe I have more to learn. And that's what we need to do is, I'm a nurse, putting our ego aside and realizing if we're not getting patients the best results, let's just listen to them. And that explained. So I have an Oura ring as well. And what I noticed is that my blood sugar would drop and I would wake up at the same time. So I now have this data and I'm like, okay, is it just that I need Ambien, or is it that I need to balance my blood sugar so I can sleep through the night? So that is why a CGM has been powerful for me. Some people say it's really expensive. I look at it as a massive investment, because once you know the meals that are going to work for you, and there are other factors that influence blood sugar, which we'll talk about, but once you know it works for you, it makes it a lot easier. And it doesn't mean we can't have ice cream or we can't have carbs, but maybe we structure the meal a little bit differently. So,
or maybe we need to take a pause, right? Like people will say like, oh, everything in moderation. Not if you're healing, not if you have like,
there's a season.
Like, there's a season for things. So if you slap on a CGM and your blood sugar, like you said, is all over the place and you're having crashes all over, that's not a season for everything in moderation. It just isn't, because you are going to still continue to feel like that. So that's a season where it's like, hey, let's dial this in and see what we need to do to keep my blood sugar stable. I love that idea of not letting your blood sugar at meals go over 30 points, because that's what we consider a spike. If it goes over 30 points at a meal, it's not this like hard and fast science where it's like 29 is great and 30 is terrible. It's not really like that, but we want to avoid these like really sharp rises and sharp falls of our blood sugar and anything that goes too far from center. So it's not like, oh, if high blood sugar is bad, the lower, the better. No, with our blood sugar, it's like that Goldilocks zone. So not too high, not too low. We want to keep it just right. And we want smooth rolling hills as opposed to these mountain ranges. So personally, I used to use the term balanced blood sugar. I think we all hear that term a lot, but that doesn't really make sense when I thought about it. I'm like, why am I using this term? A better way to describe it would be stable blood sugar, because we want it to feel stable, right? And our moods will be stable. Our energy will be stable. Our satiety will feel stable. It's amazing how if we shift to that way of thinking about it, okay, what will keep my blood sugar more stable so it doesn't rise so much? So there's a bunch of things that we can do to keep it more stable. And then I want to go back to that reactive hypoglycemia that you mentioned, because that's what a lot of people are struggling with. What we can do to keep our blood sugar stable would be, first off, prioritizing protein. Protein is, I would argue, the most important macronutrient, and it's because it's a building block, and it's what our body builds everything out of: our muscles, our bones, our teeth, our hormones, our neurotransmitters, our hemoglobin. All these things are built out of amino acids and protein. So we need to get those. And our body has this set point where it's going to send you signals that you are hungry until you meet this protein threshold. So if you are a person who's like, I'm always feeling like snacking, I always get cravings at night, I always want to sit in front of Netflix and eat, like I'm always hungry, well into the night, you have not eaten enough protein in the day, and or you don't have enough stomach acid to digest it, which is a whole other conversation, but I want to throw that in there. So we really want to fill up on protein, and for blood sugar purposes, fatty protein is actually the best choice. So especially if you're having these dips after you eat, a lot of people who have this reactive hypoglycemia, so they eat a meal, their blood sugar kind of goes up and it goes down like way lower than it was. Some people I see, as they're eating the meal, their blood sugar is dropping. These are people who are actually very hypersensitive to insulin. So we can have, like, if you come into the category where your insulin is in that normal 2 to 5 range, yet your blood sugar is dropping all the time, you may be a person with this hypersensitivity to insulin. Your body's either excreting too much, or there's some sort of like gut infection, like leaky gut stuff, other types of infections, which can drive you to be hypersensitive to it. So that just an aside. So eating the protein, super important. We want to have fatty proteins because the fat has no effect on our blood sugar. The protein can have a little effect, but the fat sort of blunts it because it slows the absorption of it into the bloodstream. So then the curve is a more rounded hill as opposed to a sharp peak that's going straight up. So having these fatty proteins, really helpful. And then adding healthy fats to your plate, also really important, because a lot of people recognize, okay, I need to lower my carbs, but then they'll have like chicken breast and broccoli. There's no energy on that plate. You have protein, a building block, and you have fiber, great for your gut and satiety, but you don't have any energy. Carbs are energy, fat is energy. So we need to have one of them showing up in that meal, or else we're going to feel hungry and we're going to feel like exhausted. We're not going to feel full. So make sure you're not skimping out on that fat. So if you're doing the chicken breast and broccoli example, try a chicken thigh with the skin on, try broccoli, smother it in grass-fed butter, and then maybe do like a quarter of an avocado. That meal, think about how much more satiated you'd feel after that meal than the first example, right? So we don't want to fear fat. A lot of women have this leftover from living through the 80s and 90s. I certainly did. And it's like, really embrace these healthy fats. So those look like fats from healthy animals, well-raised animals, like lean into those, red meats and things like that, egg yolks, and things like nuts and seeds, but go light on those because they can be hard on our digestion. And a lot of people tend to just overeat them. So limit yourself to like a handful per day. And some people are like, oh my God, only a handful. Like I kind of cut them out because they're hard to moderate for me. So know thyself. Healthy fats like grass-fed butter, olive oil or olives, coconut oil, and avocados and avocado oil, all those fruit fats. So these are the healthy fats we want to see on our plate. And then we have the category of fiber. So non-starchy vegetables contain lots of fiber, also slow the absorption of the glucose into the system, so blunting that blood sugar spike. And coincidentally, these vegetables make a really good vessel for fat. So we can put grass-fed butter on them. We can use an avocado or olive oil dressing on them if it's raw vegetables. So leaning into these really, really great tools. So this is how we want to eat our plate. We want to eat the protein first, fill up on that protein. You will be able to eat, I say eat the protein until you literally can't take another bite of it. And you will have space for the rest of the stuff on your plate. You absolutely will. But we have that protein set point, and it's so, so important for us to stay full and keep our blood sugar stable that I like to eat all my protein first. Then I have the healthy fats in the vegetables because that will fill up and take up space. And then having carbohydrates. And this is the area where it's going to be different for everybody. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone dealing with PCOS or other metabolic issues, this may be a really good time to lower those carbohydrates or really eliminate them. That's what I did when I had PCOS. In order to heal, I adopted a paleo ketogenic diet, so all real food, and I just took away my carb source and added more healthy fats. And I did some intermittent fasting that was circadian aligned. This is really important too. So when I say intermittent fasting, I do not mean skipping breakfast. I mean taking my dinner and pushing it earlier. And then once I was really fat adapted and keto adapted, I was like, I'm not even hungry for dinner. So sometimes I would skip dinner and have 2 big meals instead. And this was primarily, it should be during the first 2 weeks of your cycle when we can handle more of that. The last week of our cycle, during that luteal phase where our blood sugar is worse, this is a time where we don't want to stress our body with something like even keto or any intermittent fasting. We want to really dial that back that week because our body is actually needing more carbohydrates. So after being keto adapted for several months, this may be a time where you want to add back in some carbohydrates and cycle it in. So it's not like, hey, we never have these things or always have these things. One of the nuances of nutrition that I think a lot of people miss, and especially with women, is that we're very cyclical. We live on a seasonal planet. So it's not really biologically appropriate for many of us to eat a ton of carbs in the winter when they wouldn't have been available. Yes, in the fall. Yeah, absolutely. We're supposed to fatten up in the fall. That's why there's sweet potatoes and, squashes and all these things like harvest. We should eat these things in the fall when they're around. And then they're not around as much in the winter. And that's when, bears, they're fat before they hibernate and then they get skinny, right? And then in the spring, they start eating again. So we live on the same planet. And so thinking about having these cycles of variation that we don't want to think of anything like keto as like, I am keto, I am, I am carnivore. Like we don't want to identify with this diet. Instead, look at it as this temporary healing protocol, and it has a real different feel to it. It's like, okay, cool. I'm doing this protocol to help stabilize my blood sugar, help my body be able to burn fat for fuel, which is what is the problem with most people. Our blood sugar is dropping because we have trouble accessing that stored energy. So we have stored sugar in our liver called glycogen, and we have stored body fat. And our bodies are built to be able to utilize these backup fuels in case of food is scarce. So if we're going from breakfast, we eat a breakfast, and then let's say we have a meeting when our lunch is supposed to be. So we have used up all that energy from breakfast, and now our blood sugar is starting to dip a little bit low because we've used it up. What should happen is our liver should just give us a little bit of glycogen and bump our blood sugar up, and we're good to go. And our brains will work, our brains will be sharp, and we'll feel fine, and we'll be able to be all in that meeting. But what happens with a lot of people is that those high insulin levels block our body from utilizing stored energy. It blocks us from using the energy in our liver and utilizing body fat like overnight. So then our blood sugar drops, and what has to happen? Our adrenals have to pump us with stress hormones like epinephrine, which is adrenaline, and we wake up in the middle of the night and we think we're having a panic attack. And it's not a panic attack. It's our adrenals coming in because it had to use the backup generator to pump us and create new blood sugar to save our life. And so then our adrenals are very like they're down for the count. We're out of minerals because creating all those stress hormones is a very expensive process for the adrenals. It requires a lot of nutrients. And so then we're out of these nutrients, then our adrenals can't do a good job of keeping our blood sugar in a healthy range all the time. So we get a lot of these drops. So these are the things that are happening to a lot of people. This could be known as hypoglycemia, reactive hypoglycemia. And if we instead are able to just easily tap into that stored liver glycogen, or overnight just switch to fat burning, our bodies don't have any problem with that. And that's what we really want. And that will override those blood sugar dips. Your body's like, oh, I don't care what your blood sugar is doing. I got all this fuel. I have all these ketones.
Yes.
I have all this body fat. And it's really amazing how that is the ticket, that metabolic flexibility. I can burn carbs. I can burn fat. I can burn the sugar. Like that flexibility of our metabolism to get energy as it needs it, even without the presence of food. That is the ticket to feeling amazing and having good hormones, good sleep, good energy, and having good skin, and not feeling hungry all the time, not having cravings. It's amazing how that all just from that one piece affects every single cell, organ, and process in our body. So that's why this metabolic flexibility is just so important.
Yes. I mean, so well said. And, I have so many questions that I want to ask, but one more thing I would add as far as steps to stabilize blood sugar. Let's say I agree with what you said. I like to start with protein. Some people start with fiber, but I keep it simple: protein, fat, and then I'll finish with my carbs, especially if they're starchy carbs. So if I'm going to have ice cream, it doesn't mean that's like my thing too. It doesn't mean I don't have ice cream, but I'm not going to have it in the morning. I'm not going to have it on an empty stomach. Maybe I can go for a walk after. So how can people utilize movement to reduce the amount of insulin that their body has to pump out? What might that look like?
Yes. Great question. So I definitely skipped over some of these things that could keep our blood sugar stable. So movement is one of them. So going for walks or moving your body, doing a workout after meals is hugely important for utilizing the sugar that you just put into the system. So if you eat ice cream, first off, we wouldn't want to eat it on an empty stomach, because would be sort of what we consider a naked carb. So it's just carbohydrate by itself without any protein or fiber to slow down the absorption. So having a naked carb, some people are like, oh, I'll just have one spoonful of nut butter before I have. That's not going to work. We would need to have maybe a full salad or a full portion of cooked vegetables and some protein. And if we're doing a carb, we wouldn't want to have as much fat. So, I mean, if we think about it, most snack foods, though, like ice cream, cookies, cake, any popcorn, they're high in both energy sources, carbs and fat. So that's where it gets a little tricky, but we're not going to add too much extra fat to that meal, because we're having already the carbohydrates, and we don't want to do so much energy, tons of fat, and then add all these carbs. That wouldn't be good either, because that insulin spike would still store all the sugar and then store more fat. So that's just something to keep in mind. We want to sort of use those energy sources inversely. But we'll have, let's say the fiber and some chicken, and have that first, and then have the ice cream, and then go for a walk. So, but this walk, if it's a leisurely stroll for 10 minutes, it's probably not going to do that much. So I know even 2 minutes is helpful, but the amount of movement that you need is always going to be based on how many carbs you just consumed. So there have been times where I've gone for a walk for let's say 25 minutes, and my blood sugar, it would have started to go up, and then it kind of stays stable. And as I do the walk, and then it'll keep going up afterwards, or I'll get this double spike. And so it's okay, I really, really had a lot of carbs in there that I needed to do more movement. And then with the movement piece, there's also the idea of building muscle. So muscle is like a sponge, and it soaks up the glucose. So about 80% of the glucose that you eat at a meal goes directly to your muscles. So if your muscles are insulin resistant, which is they're some of the first organs to become insulin resistant, then they're not getting in there, and they're going to raise your blood sugar. And if we build more muscle, we have more place for the glucose to go. So building muscle is going to be so, so helpful for optimizing this metabolic health that we've been talking about.
Yes.
So muscle building activities, movement after meals, really, really important. And you mentioned something like not having ice cream in the morning. But honestly, I know that's not like a normal time to eat ice cream, but my insulin sensitivity is best in the morning and the early afternoon, and it's way worse at night. So that for me and for a lot of people I see, the very worst time to have carbs is in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say that it helps their sleep, but I think these are people who have hypoglycemia. So they do better in quotes with the higher blood sugar overnight, so their blood sugar doesn't like drop as low. I think that's putting a band-aid or actually worsening the actual root cause. So if you find that like I need to have something before I go to sleep, I don't necessarily want you to stop doing that, but I want you to know that you need to work on that, because ideally we don't have to eat before sleep in order to sleep through the night. And honestly, eating at night is when we have the worst insulin sensitivity, and it's not good for our hormones because it will raise cortisol when we eat, and that opposes melatonin, and it disrupts our circadian rhythm and our digestion. So we really don't want to eat at night. So best practice for blood sugar, hormones, and sleep would be to eat as honestly as far before bedtime as you can. So I find that my best sleep is if I fast in the evening and I eat my dinner around like 3 or 4 o'clock. That's when I get my best sleep, because my body is very much done digesting. My heart rate variability goes up, indicating my body isn't stressed because it's not busy with a meal. So, but that's maybe more of an advanced concept for some people. We're not going to jump right into that. So movement, timing, really important. And I mentioned already that circadian element of like, don't skip breakfast. And so eating breakfast is also going to be really important for our blood sugar, because we don't want to be running on stress hormones all morning. That's going to really dysregulate our cortisol, our other hormones like leptin, and it's going to drive us to not feel full after meals and kind of feel snackish and not be able to go long periods without eating. And so all of these things are really tied in. And then another thing that you can do to mitigate that blood sugar spike would be to have some apple cider vinegar or any sort of vinegar, I would say except balsamic, which has sugar in it, before a meal. And that slows the gastric emptying, which can help you to have less of a blood sugar spike from the meal as well. And it also increases stomach acid and helps with bile flow. So actually apple cider vinegar has that trifold effect, which is really, really beneficial for blood sugar and digestion.
Awesome. And, you spoke to some really good nuances. I am the type of person, I think about what the 80s and the 90s were like, fat's bad. And I don't believe that we should ever eliminate an entire macronutrient. I do think there are seasons where it might be appropriate. If I am having seizures, I would really look into a ketogenic diet. Maybe if I have some hormonal issues, this could be appropriate, but controversial to say in 2023, but women's hormones are different than men. Men are on a 24-hour hormonal cycle. Women are usually on a 28-day hormonal cycle, and it fluctuates. So what serves us at one point of the month might be different. And we're living in a man's world in the sense that it's just 9 to 5 life. You wake up, you feel the same every day. No. And we don't listen to our bodies. We don't honor our bodies because we don't know how to, or we feel guilty about it. So the way that the CGM has helped me is to figure out, okay, like roughly speaking, I tried, and I don't count calories at all. I don't even count macros, but let's just say I were to do a food log and just do an audit about what I'm consuming. I would say I try to have 30% fat, 30% protein, maybe 40% carbs. But then I realized I had to tweak that. So it's not one size fits all. It's not like this person's macro plan is going to be best for you. I think individual feedback tools that will show you how you're responding, that's really the way. But
so
that's just my opinion.
Oh, I know. I totally agree with that. I hope that we're moving towards more of this individualized nutrition approach, because we all just need things that are so different. Like on CGMs, even from the people who I coach in my programs, they're like, oh my goodness, my blood sugar spiked so crazy. I had one bite of watermelon and it shot up to like 180. And then someone else could be like, oh, my blood sugar was fine when I ate watermelon, but I ate brown rice and my blood sugar was up for like hours. So everyone has even different responses to individual foods. So that's where I don't even talk about like, oh, this carb is better than this one. It's hard to say because people have these individual responses to them. So I don't do well at all with cassava. Oof. Cassava is really rough on my blood sugar. Sweet potatoes are really rough on my blood sugar. All these paleo type staples, grain-free staples are really hard. And that's why I've had people say, oh, this started when I went gluten-free. I'm like, what? Because they were using all these substitutes that were made of corn and rice, and they spike the heck out of your blood sugar. So when it comes to carbohydrates, the best thing we can do is learn our own personal tolerance, but always go with carbohydrates that are in their whole natural form. So if a carbohydrate has been processed, the processed form of the carbohydrate will always spike your blood sugar more than the whole food equivalent. So think about apple juice versus an apple, a potato chip versus a potato, rice cake versus rice. So or dried mango versus mango, like in all of those examples, the processed form will spike you more. And that's because it takes out a lot of the fiber, or it just makes it so it's very easily dissolvable and will shoot up your blood sugar so much faster. And so that's where it comes in, where we want to have the whole food form of these carbs as often as possible. And then the quantity really matters. The time of day really matters. The time of your cycle matters. And all of that can be figured out with looking at a CGM. So that's where that individualization, these nuances really come in. And you might be like, oh, I ate this same meal yesterday. What was different today? It's like, oh, I slept like crap yesterday. So you can have that same exact meal, but it's going to impact you differently. And that's where you can go into these little things where it's like, okay, if I keep my habits, my daily lifestyle, so that I build in walking. Like I have a treadmill desk. I'm standing right now as I'm talking because I have this standing. It's the best thing I've ever bought. I've been like plugging it. I'm not sponsored. Love my treadmill desk. Best thing ever, because now I can practice what I preach all the time. And so if I have to jump on a coaching call right after lunch, guess what? I'm going to be walking. So I walk during the call. And so I can build in these things into my routine so that I can try to always mitigate these spikes as much as possible. And just knowing like, oh, I had a really bad night of sleep. I'm going to be, definitely wanting caffeine and sugar and carbs, but today would be a really good day to minimize those things because they're going to impact me worse today. And so we just like knowledge is power. It's so, so helpful to, keep you feeling better and just having so much more control over your physiology. Like so much of the stuff we try to numb, like you alluded to earlier, like, do you need Ambien? It's like when you have blood sugar dysregulation, you feel like you need, buckets of caffeine to wake up. You need carbs and sugar to power you through your day. You need ibuprofen for, the headaches that you get or the migraines or the inflammation that you have in your body. And you need anti-anxiety meds because your blood sugar is crashing. And then you need Ambien to fall asleep. So it's like, instead of all of those things, we can literally get off all of those things by stabilizing our blood sugar. And I think that is just the coolest thing ever. And so, yeah, I'm super into it.
I mean, so many of the questions I was going to ask you already just kind of answered on your own, and just kind of adding to what you said, sleep. So sleep is a non-negotiable for my mental health. After working night shift in the hospital for years, my doctor was like, never again.
Yeah.
Never again. And so let's say I sleep 4 hours a night, that's not going to be the day to add extra stress to my body by having 2 pints of ice cream for breakfast on an empty stomach. And I do agree with what you're saying. You wouldn't want to go hard on the carbs, especially after dark. High maintenance hippie. I like to get my hair and my nails done or whatever else. And I live in a fancy house and I drive a car, but we are nature and we forget that. And we have seasons. We don't live in harmony with nature. And that's where, in my opinion, a lot of the dis-ease comes from. How can the body do its job if we're not giving it what it needs, whether that's nutrients, sleep, whatever it might be. So I'm just going to modify based on where I am that day. And that's also why I really like an Oura ring. I don't know if you use that or another type of feedback tool. Okay.
Oura.
So did you
Love
ever notice a connection between the CGM and wake ups?
So I had fixed my blood sugar before getting the
Okay.
Oura, but there have been a couple of times where, my blood sugar wasn't great during the day, or like I ate something and I was like, oh, I think that was a blood sugar wake up for sure.
Yeah.
Because I'm not perfect either. And I, trying to
Yeah.
strike this balance of living a little, and then I have to kind of like, oh, I gotta rein that in, like going to
Yeah.
picnic too much and ordering this bread too much or whatever it is. So yeah, like and we do that, but it's a really good learning experience for me. I'm like, oh my goodness, I haven't felt this in a really long time. Ooh, I just thought of something I wanted to share.
Yeah.
This adrenal cocktail. Are you familiar with the
Yes.
adrenal cocktail? Okay. A lot of people promote this adrenal cocktail, and I have a reel coming out about it because the adrenal cocktail, if you don't know, is 4 ounces of orange juice, 4 ounces of coconut water, and it has salt, cream of tartar for potassium, and you can put in some collagen peptides for a little protein and some coconut milk for a little fat. So if you haven't done the math, that's 8 ounces of juice and then some minerals and some stuff. So I was like, okay, the adrenals, they love minerals. They love the salt. They love the potassium. They love even the collagen peptides because our adrenals love protein. And I was like, okay, this is sounding really good so far, right? But I'm like, what is 8 ounces of juice going to do to my blood sugar? I was like, will the protein and the coconut like fat slow the absorption? Will it do its job like that? Will the minerals just be so much that my body loves them that I won't get a spike? I had to try it for myself. So I tried this on an empty stomach in the morning when I had the best blood sugar sensitivity. I couldn't imagine if I tried it at like 7 p.m. But I try this first thing in the morning. My blood sugar was 80. It shot up to 133. Wow. And then immediately after I drank it, I started to feel jittery on the inside. I was like, oh, I don't like this feeling. I felt uneasy. I would say anxious. I felt paranoid. I felt a little like, ooh, this is weird, like that internal jitters. Then it crashed down 67 points. Wow. And that's when I started to feel terrible, super shaky. I got a headache. I was starving. I was like, this feels terrible. And all the rest of the day, my blood sugar was more volatile than I had ever seen it, meaning I was getting blood sugar crashes. I'm like, I haven't had this in a million years. So I was eating. I'm like, I feel really weird. Is my blood sugar crashing? It was super low all day. The next day, my blood sugar was still not as stable as it normally is. So I had this one thing to support my adrenals. And I used the word support in quotes. And meanwhile, it totally spiked and crashed my blood sugar, which PS, your adrenals absolutely hate. And all day long, it was playing catch up with the insulin and then the stress hormones, the insulin, stress hormones, to try to keep it back in this balanced, stable range. And it took 2 days for it to fully resolve, for me to not have issues from it. So I just want to say, if you're a person who's regularly just drinking these adrenal cocktails, this is where seeing things through the lens of blood sugar is so essential to be healthy in our modern world, that these practitioners who have really great intentions, they're like, your adrenals need minerals. It's like, yes, they do. It's like, can we do that without the blood sugar spike though? And the good news is that we can. We can do aloe vera juice for the potassium, the Lakewood Organic, great brand, no affiliation. And then we can do lemon and lime juice for the vitamin C. And so that could be a really great choice there. And that won't spike our blood sugar. And we can have it right after a meal. We talked about these no naked carbs, right? Nothing's more naked than a cup of juice, right? So having that then is going to be really helpful for your blood sugar. It's important for our adrenals and our blood sugar. They are so interconnected, but we don't want to be spiking our blood sugar. So that was just my little PSA. Please don't drink these adrenal cocktails in the way that they're shown. Don't have 8 ounces of juice. It's not going to be good for your body. I can't imagine that it would be good for anybody, maybe except a hardcore athlete who just has, lots of muscle sponges all over their body.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, to that, I would add, because I've made my own variation. I also agree. I think 4 ounces of orange juice. I mean, that's insane to me. So it's really about getting in vitamin C, potassium, electrolytes, minerals, salt, those things. So it doesn't have to come from orange juice. The way that I would make it, and I'm going to actually try it out with the CGM and see, because I'll make it with 2 ounces of orange juice, but I could do water and camu powder and just, it wouldn't taste as good, but I could do that. I don't use coconut water. I would use coconut milk or cream. So that's going to have more fat. You mentioned aloe vera for potassium, but cream of tartar powder. Do you see an issue with using that powder?
Nope, you can use that. Yeah, I just don't know how much potassium it has in it. That's what I'm unsure of. But I mean, you could totally add it in or do the aloe vera juice and then salt. Yeah. So some combination of that and if you had that 2 ounces of orange juice, the poison is in the dose. I'm telling you. So if you had the 2 ounces of orange juice and you had this after a meal, not on an empty stomach, you might not see anything on a CGM. That might be perfect for you. Or you might be super sensitive and it might spike you and crash you or spike you. Or And so it's about, that is what this whole thing is about figuring out what works for you, tinkering with it, playing with it, and looking at it as like an experiment. And if we come at this with this mindset of curiosity rather than perfection, that curiosity will disarm the perfection, because it's like, ooh, what can I learn? Like, how did I feel? What did it do to my blood sugar? It's like, ooh, that didn't feel well. Okay, won't do that again. So it's not like, a lot of people have a lot of anxiety when they put on the CGM. And I think, to me, it's happening already anyway. I might as well see what's happening, use this as really good accountability. If anyone has trouble with accountability or staying consistent, this thing is amazing for that, because you're like, oh, my blood sugar is so good today. I don't want to spike it by just like walking through the kitchen and grabbing a handful of chocolate. You don't want to spike it because you're doing really well. So it keeps you on task and on target. And it's like, if I can just get curious, this is about my greater good. Like, I'm not going to have a blood sugar spike and then croak. Like, that's not what's going to happen. It's like, ooh, okay, that's going to give me a little inflammation, and maybe I could just walk it off, or maybe I just learn for next time and just sit with those feelings of like, whoa, this is what a blood sugar crash feels like. This doesn't feel good. I don't want to choose this again. And then it becomes this choice of like, yes, I am going to have the ice cream at 8 p.m. because I'm on vacation and this is my choice. It doesn't become like, like I don't feel well and I don't know why. And I'm so drawn, like the sugar feels like it's making decisions for me. Whereas like if we stabilize our sugar, I talked about binge eating at the beginning. I never had another binge after I stabilized my blood sugar, because I don't have that crashy feeling where my body's in that crisis to get energy. And that's what was happening beforehand. And so now if I'm stable, I don't feel like I need to do that effortlessly. And it's just so freeing that I feel like when you control your blood sugar, it stops controlling you. And that's the coolest piece.
Wow. I mean, so many more questions that I could ask. And, I do have to wrap up. But one question I would really like to know is, do you have clients that start working with you and they're like, I really don't think it's my blood sugar. I really don't think there's going to be anything on a CGM. And they're like, holy shit, I cannot believe this. I can't tell you how many times that's happened. Okay.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. People have because we just have no idea how our blood sugar can affect us, because it affects so many things and so many symptoms. They're like, oh no, but I just have anxiety. I'm like, you don't have it. I'm like, it's physiological. Your body is feeling anxiety because your blood sugar is dropping. It's not coming from here in your head. It's not coming from your thoughts. It's coming from the body having a crisis of, oh my gosh, we are about to be out of energy. And you get irritable and you get cranky and you get anxious. And it's like, and there's so many other examples. It's like, well, I'm waking up in the night, but it's not my blood sugar. Sure enough, little V in the in the blood sugar at night. Like I see it constantly, for sure.
Thank you so much for that, because that has been something that a lot of people that I work with struggle to get on board with. I will respect whatever's right for people, but I'm like, it changed my life. I just the irritability, even my boyfriend, he's like, check your blood sugar. And I'm like, holy shit, it is like, it'll be 65 or something like that. And with the CGM, I pay more attention to trends, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2 because I really did have so many questions for you, but you are such a wealth of knowledge. And I know you have a podcast and you talk all about this. So if this is a topic that's interesting, please check out Danielle's podcast and follow her on Instagram. So how can people find you and possibly work with you if they feel like, hey, this sounds like something that could really help me, and this is your area of expertise, you've lived it and you've helped many people. So how can people find you?
Yeah, thanks so much. So I hang out on Instagram a lot. I make a lot of these helpful graphics to kind of see and visualize this stuff and go over the symptoms and things. And so my handle is Danielle Hamilton Health. Probably need to change that. It's pretty rough to spell. But my podcast is Unlock the Sugar Shackles. And then I also have a brand new program that I made that if you use the code SUGARFREE, it's totally free. So I can send that to you to give to your audience.
Awesome.
And the program Sugar Savvy is about learning how to test your blood sugar. So where to get a CGM, how to use the CGMs, how to understand this data, what we want to look for, the numbers that we want to look for from our doctor, the tests we want to ask for. We can look at our triglyceride and HDL ratio. So I talk about that to kind of see if we're insulin resistant. We talk about the finger prick monitors and a lot more. So this is really getting you immersed into that world of testing your blood sugar and putting on the white coat and being like stepping into the lab of like, what's going on inside, and just getting curious and figuring that out and seeing if blood sugar is an issue for you, because you will definitely be able to pick it up once you know what to look for and once you know how to interpret these numbers. And so I really want to give people that opportunity because, like I said, it's not getting picked up by our doctors in most cases. And even if it is picked up by our doctor, we want to know, like, when we're healing, like, is this good? Am I on the right track? So we can also use it for that. So I can definitely send you that link, and if you want to give that to your listeners. So
I'm sure they would love that. I would love that as well. I'm always learning. Sure. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, but in the hospital, we are happy with a blood sugar of 140 before a meal. And I would say 80% of the patients who are hospitalized had diabetes, hypertension. I mean, it was like every single time I got report, hypertension, diabetes,
Yep, every time.
It's very common. So in people who are very, very sick. So you don't have to be very, very sick to improve from this. I thought I was thriving, but I didn't even know how good I could feel. And the last thing I want to say is you mentioned the anxiety isn't coming from here, but neither of us are saying the anxiety feeling isn't real. But
real.
It's so real, but we're saying it might be coming from something that you can address, which is extremely empowering versus, hey, my data is messed up. And I tell clients all the time, I'm like, if your data is messed up, great. There's something to work with. We can improve this. And they're like, oh, I didn't think about it like that. So yeah, I hope love that. Yeah, I hope this is informative and empowering. Please check out Danielle. I've learned a lot from her, and, I'm so grateful for everything that you shared today. And I really appreciate having you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Can I just add one quick caveat? Because yes. I think one thing I didn't say that is so important is that you can have blood sugar issues and symptoms at any blood sugar number. And this is another area that doctors miss. So when you have more progressed insulin resistance and your blood sugar it sort of hits a low number for you, it might be 140 and you might feel like you're going to pass out. So a lot of people will say or the doctors will say, it can't be your blood sugar because your blood sugar is 100 right now, and it must just be anxiety. And so this is where a lot of people get missed. And I feel like I should have said this earlier. I hope people are still listening, because this is a really important point that I don't want people to gaslight themselves and say, oh, well, my blood sugar is going down, but it's only 120. So it can't be my blood sugar causing these symptoms. It absolutely can be. So think about your body's thermostat just got dialed up higher. So if I was in this room and I feel fine with the temperature and I go take like a 30-minute hot shower and I come back into this room, it's going to feel cold. I'm going to want a sweater and like put on a jacket or turn up the heat. It's the same thing with our blood sugar. If our blood sugar is used to being up in the 200s, when we drop down to 100, it feels terrible. Yes. So relatively, our blood sugar is that relative low. And that's what a lot of people are missing as well. So please know that, like, looking at these patterns, you talked about, you look at the patterns of what's happening. Is my blood sugar dropping down really fast? Like, is it at a low point for me? And then did it go up? Like, these are all things that can cause that. And then blood sugar highs, blood sugar lows, they feel almost the same sometimes. So you can get symptoms anywhere you're at when you're having like a big change that your body doesn't like. So I really just wanted to throw that in there. So thank you. Thanks for the extra space to say that.
Of course. And that's a really good point because, just like blood pressures, I feel great at, 100 over 70, most people would probably collapse or, everyone's different. Yeah. So once again, that's why I like the Oura Ring. I like CGMs because it's about bioindividuality and figuring out your trends, your patterns. One size doesn't fit all. And what better data than to know your data? I am not against testing at all, but when you're trying to make daily changes, having that daily or even more than daily feedback can be really helpful. So yeah,
I love it. I feel like we're very, very aligned with this stuff.
Yeah. And I have so much to learn from you. So I'll make sure to include them. And I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Thanks again, Danielle.
Thank you.
Historically, I've been someone that tries to really focus on beauty from within, but I'm also no stranger to decorating my shell, and I'm getting more and more into makeup, but I want to find clean options that actually work and that look good. And so a line that I've recently discovered that I love is RMS Beauty. I get it from Citrine. And one thing that people struggle with when they're switching to cleaner makeup would be a full coverage foundation. And I have found one for you. It is the Re-Evolve Natural Finish Foundation from RMS Beauty. I use the shade 00. I am loving this if I need some full coverage. I also use the Re-Evolve Radiance Locking Primer anytime I'm gonna wear makeup. So this is definitely a staple for me. I also recommend checking out their blush and eyeshadows. So the new Hydra Powder Blush I am loving. This color is called Kir Royale. It's just this beautiful color pink, and then their eyeshadow is incredible. So if you go to Citrine and use my code ASHLEYTAYLORWELLNESS, it'll save 10% on RMS Beauty and other lines, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie Podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.